Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's LinkedIn Live conversation brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader. Firstly, thank you for joining us. We host these sessions on LinkedIn because we want to hear from you in real time. Don't hesitate to drop any questions or thoughts into the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them during our live Q&A at the end. I'm Randy Larriar, Big Data, AI, and Analytics Practice Director at Optiv, and I will be stepping in for Jennifer and James, who unfortunately couldn't make today's LinkedIn Live conversation. Very fortunately, however, with me today is Tiffany Shelgren, Director of Services Enablement and Education. With a background in public education, Tiffany brings deep expertise in developing programs for cultivating inclusive, high-performing, and security-aware organizational cultures. Tiffany and I work together on Optiv's AI security initiative, along with a team of experts, including James and Jennifer. And so much of the conversation is directed about understanding AI, what we call AI literacy, and understanding the practical approaches to securing and protecting your users and citizenry at large from malicious AI. So for our discussion today, we're going to explore practical approaches for verifying content authenticity, share real-life examples of AI being used to cause harm, and techniques that you and your organizations can use to navigate the complexities of AI disinformation and malice with confidence. Thank you for joining us today. So Tiffany, why are bad actors working to spread disinformation?
That's a great question, Randy. And, with the election season upon us, let's talk specifically about that and why they're looking to spread disinformation right now. So mainly three reasons: manipulating public opinion, undermining trust in institutions, and exploiting societal divisions, right? Now, they're doing this for either political, financial, or ideological gain. And really, they don't have to work very hard to do so. People have a natural tendency to trust the content that they see on social media platforms or other information sharing platforms. Those algorithms, I think we all know this, are already working pretty hard to show us what we want to see anyways. So when whatever is new pops up and it aligns with our ideologies or it plays into existing fears that we may have, we tend to believe it. That's just natural for us as humans. Now, AI amplifies the scale and precision of these campaigns that these bad actors are putting out there, allowing them to target individuals and groups based on behavior or maybe their tendencies, making the disinformation more pervasive and harder to detect. But that's why you and I are here today to talk about the public vigilance that's needed. It's crucial that us as citizens or our organizations, if we're responsible for teaching our employees how to recognize disinformation, how to remain vigilant when we're consuming information, particularly during seasons like elections. So both in consumption and in dissemination, which we'll talk a little bit about.
Awesome. And this isn't new, right? I mean, with or without AI, people have been trying to influence campaigns, businesses. What are some of the examples also from where you see just in traditional cybersecurity of threat actors trying to do bad things by being persuasive or by putting in content that could have potentially been generated by farms of people in the past and now maybe is generated by AI?
I mean, the easiest one, most obviously, is phishing, right? Just playing on human emotion in order to get you to click, in order to get you to share information, reply, open attachments, whatever it may be, just that general play on emotion to incite action. That's probably the largest place that we see it now.
Yeah, I think I recall some of the previous election cycles with the infamous hacks of emails and different things started, as most things do, with a phishing link. And this is back before ChatGPT in the days of being able to generate any content on demand, right?
That's correct.
One thing I think we do need to be aware of with AI is that it's incredibly persuasive. There's a lot of research out there showing how artificial intelligence may or may not be more intelligent than you, but it might be able to out-debate you. And so whether you're working with a AI or you're debating a human, what are some best practices and things that you think about when you think about how to prepare organizations and citizens for dealing with such an onslaught of persuasive information?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So just general media literacy. AI literacy is great, but just general media literacy, understanding what trusted sources are, understanding, how to cross-reference, how to cross-check things that you see in the media. That's a basic skill that we all need to get better at. We need to slow down and take the time to use that skill. I would say, you're talking about the ability of generative AI to create content that may be smarter than us. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to present to a group of retired businessmen and businesswomen who are in this community service group now. And a question got brought up about ChatGPT and my thoughts about it. And so I pulled up the app and I said, give me the most evil movie villain that you can think of. And someone said like Hans Gruber, and my husband nearly killed me for not knowing who that was. But I'm not a big movie buff. So anyways, I said, well, give me somebody else. And they said Darth Vader, the biggest movie villain. And so I just asked ChatGPT, said, envision that you are a political strategist and you are working for Darth Vader's campaign. Can you develop an email that you would send to the name of the group of people that I was presenting to, convincing them that Darth Vader is a viable candidate, right? And that text that ChatGPT was able to generate and the arguments, it left people speechless, and so you're right. In addition to just the age-old ways that social engineers have tried to play on our emotions, generative AI gives them a whole nother brain to be able to generate that content, right? And those arguments, which is something that we need to be aware of. If we see something that's sensationalized, where Darth Vader is running for president or Kermit the Frog, right? That we need to be able to take a step back and remember that there are tools like generative AI out there that are used in attacks. So I'm sure you've done similar type demonstrations.
I've made the same argument, the giant military base destroyed, and he's the only one who survives, and it turns out the terrorist was his son. Very, very suspicious. Those events in 1977 should be looked into more deeply. But I think that raises an interesting point, and I don't know, from a technology perspective, if you've got questions for me on how we approach misinformation and thinking through these things when we're building and working and securing AI models.
Yeah, well, so one that I would ask is, because I've seen you demonstrate a number of different AI technologies, right? So are there tools or approaches that you would use just as an individual to verify or identify AI-driven disinformation, whether it be in video, in text? What are some of the ways that you do that personally?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the interesting things I think about this AI revolution is there's a lot of things that will be automated, like content generation, to varying degrees of capability. But it makes us refocus on what makes us human. And a lot of the best practices for dealing with AI is actually stuff that you learn, from the Socratic method from the Greeks, right? Of questioning and, having skepticism with anything you encounter. And it's just as true as if you're, having a good faith debate with someone you disagree with, as it is with, encountering, clickbait misinformation online. But essentially, question the sources, read them yourselves, question the sources of the sources. If you're going to be making a decision, whether that's about deciding as a business to transfer, massive amounts of money to someone who appears to be your CFO giving you an account, but could be a deep fake, as in very real examples have happened recently. It's worth thinking about what is normal, what the level of relationship, what kind of trust you have between this individual, and how can you verify outside of the context of where you're having the conversation or requested to do the action. So things like multi-factor authentication, different forms of digitally encrypted signatures of identity. Many of Optive's partners provide different solutions around the identity and the verification space, especially for corporations. As an individual, I think we've all learned at this point not to just trust ChatGPT blindly, or Google Gemini or Anthropic Claude or any of them, because these large language models are trained over a very long period of time. They need to have a cutoff of what they know at a certain point. And we don't have access for most of them to the internals to really know how they were trained or what they were trained on. So that means if you trust them to answer a question, you have to trust that whoever trained them, the data they selected, the way that they trained it, that their worldview aligns with yours, and that the facts that they would have the model reproduce make sense in your context. And almost no one does that anymore at, as a serious kind of production scale. Everybody's thinking about providing the model context in something called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. Or basically what we've learned through 2 years of widespread use of generative AI models is they're not that good at information retrieval. But what we can do is feed them the information we want them to summarize, and they're excellent at that. So when you think about that life cycle and you think about the process, it's all about understanding the sources, how they were retrieved, how they were ranked. How do you prioritize one source off of another? And as you're coming in as a tester, or if you're building these systems, you want to ask those questions. You want to really surface those assumptions and those biases to make sure that you're coming up with the right answer. So long story short, when I see something that seems any kind of information about an election, about a candidate, about something that I need to make a critical action on, I want to look at sources. I want to use tools like Perplexity that at least will give me the next level of references that I can click through to. But ultimately, it's about adopting skepticism and verification, especially if you don't have a direct relationship with the source or firsthand evidence, observation of what's been going on. Sadly, it's deep fakes or just doctored images have been around for a while, and I think people are getting to the point where they do recognize that this is a problem. So it's not like you can just plug AI in and massively persuade people. It's going to be the more subtle ways that it comes across that we all have to be vigilant around, because it's just going to be easier for bad people to do more complex things to trick us.
So let's talk about some of those more advanced techniques. So you mentioned deepfake videos, and you and I are pretty passionate about increasing AI literacy amongst every person in our life and the clients that we work with. But deepfake videos are kind of at that ground level of AI literacy, understanding the abilities of these tools. AI generated text, for news articles, social media posts, for phishing emails, manipulated images or memes. We've got all of that. But as we look at more advanced techniques for spreading disinformation, how I guess maybe not how, but can you talk to us about some of those different ways? Are they poisoning the data lakes? Are they changing the search history response rankings? Are they creating bot networks of AI humans to flood social media? Talk to us about some of that.
Sure. And in cybersecurity, this is always spy versus spy, right? As we uncover one approach and technique, someone is innovating just as hard with fewer restrictions to find new ways around it. So all those are possible. It's tough to say. We're so early in this stage. I think I saw stats somewhere. There's more elections happening in 2024 than there have been in a very long time across the world. There's a lot of concern about this issue right now, and there's actually differing opinions on whether or not it's happening and it's effective. In terms of, again, people knowing that bots are not really reliable sources of information. It's about persuasive narratives and shaping the worldview, and also that social media echo chamber where if you believe something, you're only going to be fed beliefs that you only believe. So I challenge everybody to try to break out of that, just to understand the best articulation of if you can make a good articulation for your opponent's point of view, that's a good kind of test that you really truly understand your own point of view. With the other things that I think are really interesting to watch, the leading frontier models from the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic, especially with the new release last week of O1, which we're still really digging into what it can do, they're very persuasive, right? And I think that's where the capability to create a customized, persuasive message to bad actors is going to be more and more of a factor, because we can probably control for not getting the information if it's from like a random bot source, or verifying the links if we're actually doing research. But it's in those casual conversations with the talking points, and the different ways that messages are going to be disseminated through society, that it's going to be very interesting to see. And I think one of the things that media organizations and individuals should be thinking about is, how can I use AI to check for that bias, check for that persuasiveness. As powerful as it is to create harm, it can also be used to give you mental models to think through things, to help you challenge your assumptions, to help you to think through first principles, what you're trying to understand, and give you a thinking assistant to augment your ability to make good decisions.
That's actually a really good point, and thank you for sharing that one. So far we've been talking about how we as consumers of information should be looking at AI and kind of understanding motives. Let's narrow our focus a little bit and talk about campaigns and officials and the people there. Most of these campaigns are comprised of senior policy officials and thousands upon thousands of volunteers who are not all cybersecurity experts. That's not the thing that they wake up and do every day. They can implement security awareness training. They can promote AI literacy. But what are some of the other things that they can do as they are disseminating information out there in order to make sure that we're protecting the general public?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a campaign is like a, corporation that exists for like 2 years and then goes out of business on election day, right? There's a lot of things that need to be done very quickly, and cybersecurity is very often not on the top of the heap, except for until something devastating happens, like a data breach or a serious undermining of the campaign, which will happen at the worst possible moment. So it's important to think through all the basics in terms of having a cybersecurity plan and approach for your campaign and for organizations that are advocating and are involved during critical time periods. Thinking through how will someone gain access to your most sensitive information and disrupt your plans. We know that there are very sophisticated bad actors who work on behalf of nation states, who have political agendas, who have all sorts of motivation to do bad things. And so being sure you're thinking through things about multi-factor authentication, zero trust architectures, assuming that if you've got tens of thousands of volunteers, some of them are going to click a phishing email and potentially begin the process of having your entire campaign be disrupted by that kind of an attack. We've also seen in a lot of parts of the world, cybersecurity, cyber warfare is sometimes taking the place or augmenting kinetic warfare. And so being aware, again, from a government perspective, or as organizations are facing the impact of some of those very challenging geopolitical situations, cyber is definitely a part of it. And so anytime you're involving people with cyber, informing them about those risks and how to handle them, also giving your teams the opportunity to catch the attacks as they're happening, potentially to fight back. So there's a lot of really good cybersecurity practices that should be a part of campaigns and will become more and more important. The other side of it is again, the critical thinking, the emphasis on being sure that you are truly taking direction from who you think you are, that you're acting in the interests of the candidate or the campaign that you're working for, and that you have ability to verify instructions, verify content, and really make sure that you're working together with the humans and not let the automation just sort of run the show.
Great. No, great point. So we have a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time. Maybe I can ask you the first, and then you can toss the second over to me.
Sure.
So the question that was submitted: what role does AI literacy have in identifying the signs of disinformation?
So, AI literacy, I think, is important because it is such a common part of life that we don't really think about, but it is becoming a bigger and bigger part of just how everything works, right? From the content we consume to the way we might interact with that content, the different services we might engage with, and ultimately, who we choose to vote for. Having an awareness of the role that AI plays in our digital life is kind of like having an awareness of the role that the sun plays in our physical life. Like, it's going to be everywhere. And you notice it when it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So I think it's very important for people to consider AI literacy as a part of just, basic citizenship, to be sure that you're thinking through and aware of, some of the ways that this can impact you. The other thing to think through is when you're all probably part of an organization that is employing AI, is using AI, and so beyond just the citizenship, is having the awareness of the capabilities that you could be using to potentially, promote your career, promote your company's competitive position, as well as the risks that you're exposing in that space. And that, with Optiv, our big focus is on, cybersecurity with organizations and governance. And we've got some really cool resources that actually, I think my next question is to you, Tiffany, on how do we get a greater security awareness and close some of those training gaps?
No, that's a great question. And AI literacy is at the foundation of that. And we actually have a free resource on our website, optiv.com, where you can learn about different topics covered with AI literacy. And we'll drop that in the chat. So there's a link for anybody listening if they want to, take a look at that. But, there are programs, security awareness programs that incorporate AI. Literacy, and Optiv has one of those. Depending on a role that someone has in an organization, that changes the amount of AI literacy that they need. Does everyone need to know how the large language models are, the infrastructure of those and how they are trained and all of that? Not necessarily to that level of detail, but they do need to understand how AI is used as a threat vector, and what things they can do when they maybe anticipate that they have disinformation that's AI generated. We offer training for that, and this training is ongoing. Kind of to your point, Randy, about AI literacy is like understanding how the sun works in our daily life. It's going to be something that evolves and continues to evolve. So ongoing continuous learning about AI, how to use it securely in the organization that you're in, how to consume it as an individual, all of that is going to be really important to us as whole people. And so, for those that are listening that may be in charge of or have influence over the security awareness programs in your organization, ask the questions. What are we doing to incorporate AI as a topic? How are we linking that to other social engineering tactics, right? As you mentioned, playing upon people's emotions, their fears, their beliefs, that is an age-old tradition of our friendly little threat actors. And, we want to make sure that we're staying on top of the change in the threat landscape. So doesn't have to be something that is, hours upon hours of training. These are short little nuggets of information to keep people aware.
Well, awesome. Tiffany, thank you so much for a great discussion today on navigating AI disinformation and really increasing the AI literacy in all walks of life. And thank you, everyone listening, either live or in the replay, for joining Optiv for today's LinkedIn Live conversation. If you're interested in learning more about cybersecurity solutions that fit your needs, please connect with us at optiv.com or respond in the comments. I think Tiffany and I will be checking them out and be happy to respond back with any other questions you have. Have a great rest of your day.